First, I'd like to welcome everybody to Fenwick's Public Tech Company Virtual Situation Room for COVID-19. All of the senior public company attorneys here at Fenwick have been having conversations among ourselves and with clients, executive and board members about the issues that we are dealing with or should be dealing with in the current coronavirus situation. It seems like a good idea to capture some of these and the substance of these conversations and make them readily accessible for our clients. Turning them into a videocast series seemed like an approach that was fitting to the moment. To that end, a few of us have gathered together today to kick off the series with a discussion of the board's role during the COVID-19 pandemic and how we are seeing and advising boards and board committees to address it. I'm Dave Bell. In addition to being a corporate and securities partner, I co-chair Fenwick's corporate governance practice. With me today are Susan Muck, who in addition to being a securities litigation partner, also co-chairs our corporate governance practice with me. Ron Bensour, a partner in our capital markets and public companies practice. Don Belt, a partner in our corporate practice that also spends a lot of time advising public companies. And finally, Jamie Evans, who is a partner in and co-chair of Fenwick's capital markets and public companies practice. When advising boards in crisis situations, I think it's always a good idea to start with first principles. And in this context, that's the fiduciary duties that board members have that underpin how they should address the situation. Susan, maybe you could kick things off with a discussion there.
Sure. Boards of directors are presumed to act in good faith and in the best interest of the corporation under a doctrine called the business judgment rule. That rule gives them protection in the event their actions are later challenged. But in order to avail themselves of business judgment rule protection, directors of public companies and private companies must take steps to ensure that they are reasonably well informed, that they've availed themselves of information that's out there in the marketplace or in the environment about the issues that they're being asked to address. In addition to ensuring that they're well informed, they must demonstrate that they've exercised reasonable oversight, that they have acted in a deliberate fashion. Taking that information into account. Typically, what we expect directors to do is to bring to bear the sources of information available to them when they have meetings with management, and to help provide advice on risk, on operational issues, on compliance issues, by ensuring that those sources of information the directors have considered are provided to management in a thoughtful, careful way. Recently, as ESG has taken on great prominence, boards are meeting much more often and considering things about the environment, about companies' risk for things like pandemics. And so ironically, while the coronavirus crisis is a very serious one, many boards have already put in place policies and procedures to help them become better informed so that they are better prepared to address environmental, social, or governance crises like the coronavirus pandemic.
So, and to that end, I think we all think it's a good idea that boards minute the meetings that they're having about these things, and that the minutes at least be in what we call medium form minutes, where there's a medium level of detail where it's clear that these are the topics that have been discussed. It doesn't need to be at all in the form of play by play of the conversation, but it does need to hit the topics and the subjects that are discussed, and that there was information reported by management, information that was available from the outside, and the fact that there was conversation and discussion and deliberation about these things, and all the kinds of operational and other issues that we'll get to in a little bit here, to make sure that you're helping to record that to help protect the board going forward.
And Dave, one thing I would add to that, is I think one of the challenges that a lot of our management teams have is they've become very accustomed to speaking through email mediums or text mediums with their boards, and it takes on a very rapid fire, informal cadence. One of the things I've been encouraging, my boards to really focus on is, one, assume all of that material will then be discoverable, but also it doesn't build a particularly good record in terms of the deliberations that should really be undertaken in a formal setting. And and Susan, I'm sure you have views on this, but I think maintaining those privilege concepts to the extent you can, and then making sure that you're not having this ad hoc, various conversations between board members and management and other constituencies.
It's a great point, because this is a time period when companies are running a lot of scenarios about what the future looks like as a result of coronavirus, and keeping the flow of information relatively narrow, confined to those with a need to know, is important, not just from a privilege standpoint, but also from the standpoint of protecting material information from being disclosed to too wide a group, or from creating some confusion about possible scenario planning that may be extreme and may indicate some really severe consequences, when really it was just management and the board having a prudent discussion about potential scenarios that really was not intended to be distributed widely within a company.
Yeah, and on that front, it's probably good in these kinds of communications, especially when you're doing the sort of contingency and scenario planning, for labeling to be clear about these things when materials are generated, to be pointing out that that these are hypothetical and scenario planning, not intended as what we expect as an outcome or an outlook or a projection. Being careful about those things so that there isn't an inference later about what something was that was attached to an email or sent in a board package, that was somehow later characterized as, oh, this was their projection, when really this was, hey, these are, if everything goes badly and we have to make adjustments, this is what it would look like. And so those are just very different things, and having appropriate and careful labeling to avoid that kind of imputation later is important. So
we're also telling a lot of our clients to try to keep communications with the board on live calls as opposed to over email. Susan, I'd love to get your thoughts. Obviously, it's not feasible for all communications to be over calls with the board. Otherwise, we'd probably be having calls on a daily basis. What are some best practices that you're seeing in terms of keeping some of those communications privileged, whether that be, tagging emails as privilege or keeping legal on those communications?
Tagging them as legal without having lawyers actually part of the communication will not do enough to ensure they're privileged in subsequent litigation. So it's really important that you set a record, I think, especially now, by sending an email to the people who you want to participate in the call saying, we're going to have a privileged discussion at X time. That way you have given the lawyers an ability down the road, if there is ever litigation, to easily identify a communication that was intended to be privileged. And you've warned the participants, this is going to be a privileged communication. And certainly your lawyers should be taking a leading role in the discussion.
So with that sort of groundwork, maybe we can turn to the kinds of things that boards should be then addressing as they do the oversight that we talked about. It's important, at that level first to make clear that the board isn't the management of the company. They aren't going to themselves be diving in operationally and driving things and making sure that they're careful about that line, that they're not stepping over that line. Is just always something to bear in mind. Management is the people that are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company. But at the same time, with that groundwork, what are the kinds of things that that you guys are all talking to clients about, the executives and management team about, that they should be addressing here, or that you're seeing in best practices to make sure are covered?
Yeah, I think absolutely you're right, Dave. There still needs to be the line between operations and board oversight. I think one thing that's maybe a little bit different in this environment, however, is things that are moving so quickly. And the information is flowing very, very fast. It's changing, on an hourly basis, and people are getting very different views on it. So I think in some ways that very quick information sharing is really heightened here. And that board members may be bringing views across many different companies in a way that's very valuable to management, even more so than in a normal day-to-day scenarios.
Yeah, so I think, when I talk to clients and with that line in mind, boards first and foremost are often focused up front on employee health and safety. That's a sort of basic grounding that they need to have. And when you start thinking about sustainable enterprise, making sure that you're looking out for the health and safety of your employees, and that the management has taken steps to address those things, and the board is aware of what those steps are and how they're being considered and addressed going forward, is probably one of the first and foremost things I see boards doing and should be doing. And I think a lot of them, as this has been unfolding for days now, a lot of them are now past that initial phase of that, but they need to be paying attention to that ongoing, because as you point out, facts change and things are developing over time. So coming back to it periodically is a good idea.
And to that end, I had an interesting conversation with one of my boards yesterday, actually, where early in the process, they had revisited their existing business continuity planning that was designed to address, at least hypothetically, these kinds of instances, which I think in many cases in the past has been an important exercise, but hasn't actually had to live in the real world. And so I've been seeing this particular board struggle with, okay, our business continuity plan doesn't really necessarily fit well with the facts and circumstances that we're now dealing with. And so being able to articulate the way in which those things are changing, or why certain pieces of that either were made more stringent or haven't been abided by for whatever reason, has become a really interesting challenge. And I think, this sort of adaptability of not just the board itself, but internal controls, disclosure controls, all of the related roll-ups that go into making sure you're having that real-time dialogue with the board.
And the business continuity needs to obviously go beyond the people aspects of things, and it's everything from the infrastructure that supports the company's products and service offerings, supply chain if you're in a physical goods company, critical third-party service providers, understanding what the continuity plans and how what the company is understanding from those providers about what their continuity plans are, et cetera. And those are all questions board members should be asking, diving in on, and making sure they're getting information from management to make sure that those are all being addressed and appropriately covered. So.
I think also one other important consideration that boards should be thinking about is not only sort of financial impacts of actions that the companies take, but how third-party constituents, stakeholders, especially in this increased focus of ESG landscape, are thinking about actions that the company is taking during these difficult times, whether that be layoffs or even how you conduct layoffs. Do you do them over Zoom? Do you do them, how do you do that at this point in time? It's, all of these things are very challenging. I saw the other day, I think Mark Benioff put out a pledge that companies are signing up to, that they're not going to be laying off employees for a period of 90 days. So kind of thinking about how all of these decisions are ultimately going to be analyzed, not only by your stockholders, but customers, employees, et cetera.
And not just that, at the board level, the board should have an understanding, what is the crisis communications plan here? Both internal and external audiences, how are those being arranged? What advisors do you have on that? There are obviously some very good crisis communications firms and public relations and investor relations firms that all of our clients work with. The board should get an understanding of what are the communications plans, what is the messaging that is going out, so that they can understand and internalize the messaging themselves and be consistent with it, but also have some input and understanding on with management about what should and how it should be being communicated. And as you're pointing out, there are lots of stakeholders here that need to be thought of. And that's the Salesforce example that you mentioned earlier is a perfectly good illustration of the kinds of things that need to be addressed, where you have a workforce that's very concerned about what does this mean for them. They're working from home, they're disconnected from their peers and their colleagues in the normal way. They're nervous about their families, nervous about their livelihood. And so that kind of communications that need to be thought through and addressed as part of a strategic communications plan is important here. And that's usually part of contingency planning for crises, but at the same time, the real world, the old Mike Tyson expression, everybody has a plan in a fight until they get hit in the face. And that's kind of what happens here. And so it's useful for boards and management teams to be really spending time on thinking about what is our communications plan and be thoughtful about it holistically and not reactive.
I think that some of the really good companies and really progressive boards are using the adage that you don't let a good crisis go to waste, to really think about their communications and crises plans and board succession and management succession planning to a degree that no one had really thought about or taken probably seriously in quite this way before. I mean, now you've got succession planning that you have to be thinking about because companies are facing illnesses at the senior executive ranks that they never anticipated could be so quickly turning into serious crises for the
That's
team.
actually one of the topics that we'll definitely come back to in one of our future videocasts here is how to deal with senior executive illness and think about the issues involved there. And so it's something we should definitely plan on coming back to.
Dave, one thing I wanted to just touch on, and I know we're probably running short on time here a little bit, but one of the other pieces of, I think, information that I've been giving boards in terms of how to conduct themselves is rather than provide email updates, interim email updates between formal meetings or what have you, is given how dynamic the situation is, and I think there's a real desire on the part of boards to understand what's happening in real time, is I've been encouraging clients to think about using interfacing between the lead independent director and the CEO, or the CFO and the audit committee chair, and sort of use those existing roles as a mechanism to provide more frequent updates as companies move through these dynamic issues in real time.
And so, obviously other things that on the oversight point of perspective that are being paid attention to, financing and liquidity, compensation issues, recruiting and retention, perhaps making reductions in force to address financial situations. There are lots of things that boards need to be paying attention to. There are also some things that are sometimes not as obvious on that front. You see lots of companies had plans where they were phasing out of business and or adjusting where they've made investments in their development or et cetera, that were built on an idea that we were going to have a certain degree of churn in our workforce. We were going to have reduction in headcount that was going to be by natural attrition. The reality of the situation right now is that that's probably not going to happen. People aren't going to be in natural ways leaving their jobs to go take jobs at other opportunities, because those opportunities now are freezing hiring themselves in a lot of instances. And so where companies had plans that were built, even if they aren't having impacts from the reductions in revenue or bookings, et cetera, if their plans were built on the idea that they were going to have reductions in headcount in overall or in certain areas based on natural attrition, they need to now adjust for that. And so there are lots of things like that that need to be thought through. And you see boards now diving into and asking questions about to make sure that they revisited what they had done before and what assumptions were built into those. The other things that I think are often being addressed here and being thought from a realism of planning point of view is productivity is meaningfully down at a lot of companies. That has to do with the work from home situations, the closing of facilities, the limitations on infrastructure, et cetera. And so those are all other areas that are causing people to adjust their plans.
Some companies
then,
and oh, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
Jamie.
go for it, Susan.
I was just going to point out that there are a lot of boards that are encouraging management to look carefully at options for insurance, not the typical D&O insurance, although that might be available, but there are coverages that could help some companies out of property policies, environmental policies,
Business interruption insurance.
business interruption insurance in some cases might provide some coverage. So, I think boards should be asking management the question, have you taken a look at this? Have you spoken with your broker? Are you thinking about it expansively to try to collect anything that we might be able to recover from any of our available sources?
Right, and then also looking at force majeure clauses in various contracts and seeing how those might apply. Thinking both through this crisis though, and then long term, eventually we'll get through this, and what will things look like at that point. I think the other questions I'm seeing a lot about are the government, various government pieces, which are programs obviously for aid. Heard this morning the House just passed the Senate bill, so we'll see how that all shakes out. And then but even before that, the local orders on shelter in place, how that acts with state orders, how that interacts with federal guidance, and how to navigate this landscape when there's a lot of uncertainty of, will people be able to come to work?
And uncertainty, is an important thing for everybody to keep in mind here. Some aspects of visibility are down meaningfully in companies' businesses, and so nimbleness is going to be important. And attention to sorting out at the board level and the senior management level, what are our leading indicators of perhaps our business is turning in important ways. For companies that are, for example, a SaaS company might be paying particular attention to changes in their renewal rates to see if that's going to impact their business. Subscription companies otherwise are probably thinking they're reasonably comfortable on their revenue levels for the year, but if their renewal rates are turning, that may be something they need to address in their planning. So they're looking for those kinds of leading indicators at the board and the senior executive level is an important area of attention right now.
One thing that I've seen some boards do here, obviously we know that management is often very rosy about their business, but not necessarily approving kind of lower financial plans, but actually pushing on management teams to do a little bit of scenario planning. Maybe revenue from new customers isn't going to go down 30%, but it might actually go down 50 or 60%. So kind of looking at how the overall health of the business will be and what your liquidity position is going to be at different at different impact levels.
No, and on that front, I think all boards, if they aren't, they should be revisiting their stock buyback and dividend programs, whether both from a liquidity point of view, but also just from the external optics and strategic communications point of view. In this environment, a lot of questions will be raised around those kinds of programs, and so they need to be carefully considering those as in addition to just the liquidity needs. I think we've covered a lot of things. Given the multifaceted issues in the crisis, management teams are often having individuals cover a variety of areas with the board and cover a variety of subjects that are not necessarily where they spend their normal day-to-day lives. The board should be making sure that they have an understanding of those general crisis response plans and thinking through how they roll through in a lot of subject areas. I think maybe we should close it out here today and plan on coming back to a number of these kinds of subjects, things like insider trading and regulation FD, public disclosure requirements, financial statements and guidance considerations, internal controls. So we'll be coming back on a lot of these kinds of subjects in future videocasts. With that said, I think, I know we need to get back to assisting clients and addressing these ongoing developments. We'll also mix up the group a bit in some of these future discussions, get some other of our experts on the line. But I wanted to invite the audience if you have questions that you'd like us to address or topics that you'd like us to discuss that are relevant to executives and board members of public technology companies in the current coronavirus situation, please post them to us via the link on the web page for this videocast series, and we'll try to address those in some of these upcoming discussions as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.